I was 18 when I signed my name away to a man who never asked for permission, only obedience. The pen felt heavier than it should have, like it knew what it was about to do before I did, like it understood that one signature could redraw the entire map of my life. And maybe it did, because the moment the ink touched paper, the room went silent in a way that didn't feel natural, not like people were being polite, but like they were afraid to breathe too loudly in his presence. And I didn't need to look up to know why. I could feel him there, standing across from me, still as stone. Watching, always watching. Adrian Moretti, the man everyone whispered about but never named out loud. The kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice because the world had already lowered itself for him. And somehow, now, I belonged to him. Not because I chose it, but because circumstances had cornered me into a decision that didn't feel like a decision at all. My father's shaking hand still haunted the edge of my vision. The way he couldn't meet my eyes, the way guilt hung on him heavier than the debt that had brought Adrian to our door in the first place. $2 million. That was the number, too big to comprehend, too real to ignore. And somehow I had become the solution. Not money, not time. Just me, traded like something of value I didn't realize I had until it was too late. And Adrian had accepted without hesitation, not greedily, not eagerly, just decisively. Like this had always been the plan, like I was always going to end up here, sitting in a leather seat that smelled like wealth and quiet power, being driven away from everything I had ever known while the city lights blurred outside the tinted window, my reflection staring back at me like a stranger, wide-eyed, silent, trying to process the fact that nothing about my life belonged to me anymore. And yet, the strangest part wasn't the fear, it wasn't even the uncertainty, it was him, the way he hadn't touched me, not once. Not when I stood there signing the contract, not when I walked past him to leave, not even when the car door was opened for me like I was something fragile instead of something owned. It didn't make sense, not with everything I had heard, not with the reputation that followed his name like a shadow, ruthless, cold, untouchable. And yet, when I finally glanced up, just once, I caught something in his eyes that didn't match any of it. Something quieter, something controlled, something that felt dangerously close to familiarity, like he recognized me in a way I couldn't understand. And that was the moment the fear shifted into something else, something sharper. Because being owned was one thing, but being known by someone like him, that was something entirely different. And as the gates of his estate opened without question, as the world I used to know disappeared behind me without ceremony, one thought settled into my chest, steady and unshakable. This wasn't the beginning of something random. This was the continuation of something I didn't remember starting, and somehow, that terrified me more than anything else. I did not expect silence to feel louder than fear, but that was the first thing I noticed when the car finally stopped. Not the size of the estate or the iron gates that closed behind us with quiet finality, but the absence of noise, no shouting, no chaos, just stillness, controlled and deliberate, like everything here existed under a set of rules I had not been taught yet. And as the driver stepped out to open my door, I hesitated for exactly 1 second, long enough to realize that hesitation would not change anything. So I stepped out on my own before he could reach for the handle, my sneakers touching polished stone that reflected the soft glow of lights lining the driveway. Everything pristine, everything intentional. And when I looked up, the house did not look like a home. It looked like a statement, tall windows, clean lines, nothing excessive but nothing lacking. The kind of place that did not need to prove wealth because it simply existed within it. And he was already there, standing at the top of the steps like he had been waiting, not impatiently, not curiously, just certain. Adrian Moretti did not move when I approached, did not offer a greeting, did not extend a hand. He just watched me climb each step, as if measuring something I could not see. And when I finally reached him, close enough to notice the faint scent of his cologne and the sharp clarity of his gaze, he spoke for the first time since we left my house. "You will be safe here," his voice low, even, not a promise, not a threat, just a statement. And something about that unsettled me more than anything else because safety implied danger. And I had not agreed to understand that part yet. "I did not ask for this," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. And for a moment, something shifted in his expression, not irritation, not amusement, something quieter, something almost familiar again. "No," he replied. "You did not." And that was it. No argument, no dismissal, just acknowledgement, which somehow made it harder to push back against him, because I did not know how to fight someone who was not trying to overpower me in the ways I expected. He turned then, walking inside without checking if I would follow, and I hated that I did, hated that my feet moved anyway, crossing the threshold into a space that felt colder than the night air, not in temperature, but in precision, everything placed exactly where it belonged, every surface untouched, like nothing here was accidental, and I suddenly became aware of myself in a way that made my skin feel too tight, like I did not belong in a place this controlled. "Your room is upstairs," he said without looking back, and the word "your" echoed strangely in my mind because nothing about this felt like mine, not the house, not the situation, not even the future that had been decided for me in a matter of minutes. I stopped halfway up the stairs, my hand gripping the railing. "Why me?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. And this time, he did stop, just for a second, just enough to tilt his head slightly, not turning fully, not revealing everything, just enough to let me see the edge of something behind his composure, something restrained, something that had been there long before tonight. "You will understand," he said, and then he kept walking, leaving me standing there with a question that did not feel new, just unanswered, like I had been asking it long before I ever met him. And as I stepped into the room that was supposed to be mine, I realized something that made my chest tighten in a way fear had not managed to do. This place was not unfamiliar to him, but somehow, it did not feel unfamiliar to me either, like I had walked into a memory I could not quite reach. And that was when I understood, this was not just a marriage I had been forced into. This was something he had been building long before I knew his name. I did not sleep that night, not because the bed was unfamiliar or the room was too quiet, but because everything felt too deliberate, like even the silence had been arranged for me. The sheets smooth, the air perfectly cool, the curtains drawn just enough to let the city lights bleed through in soft lines across the floor, and I stood there for a long time without moving, just looking, trying to find something out of place, something human, but there was nothing, not a wrinkle, not a shadow. That did not belong, and somehow that made it worse, because it meant this was not temporary. This was prepared, this was expected, like someone had known I would be here long before I ever stepped through that door, and that thought followed me even when I finally sat on the edge of the bed, my hands resting in my lap as if I were waiting for instructions that never came. Hours passed, I think, or maybe it was minutes. Time did not feel real here, not in a place where everything seemed frozen. In control, and eventually I stood again, moving through the room slowly, opening drawers, not to search for anything specific, just to confirm that this was real, clothes folded neatly, in my size, shoes lined up as if they had been chosen with intention, and I froze when I realized that nothing here was random. Every piece belonged to me, without ever having been mine. And that was when the unease shifted into something sharper, something closer to truth, because this was not preparation for a guest, this was preparation for me, specifically me, and I did not know how that was possible. My fingers brushed against the dresser, and that was when I saw it, a small frame tucked slightly to the side, almost hidden but not entirely, like it had not been meant to be obvious. And I should have walked away. I should have ignored it, but I did not. I picked it up, slowly, my breath catching before I even turned it around, because something inside me already knew. And when I looked, the world did not stop. It tilted, just slightly, just enough to make everything feel wrong. It was a photograph, old, faded at the edges, and in it, there was a girl, younger, maybe 8 or 9, standing in front of a small house with chipped paint and a crooked mailbox, her hair pulled back, her smile uncertain but real, and it took me 1 second to recognize her, maybe less, because I had seen that face every day in the mirror for years. It was me. It was my childhood home, a place I had not thought about in a long time, a place I had convinced myself did not matter anymore, and yet here it was, in a room that was supposed to belong to me now, in a house owned by a man I had met only hours ago. My fingers tightened around the frame, my heart beating faster not from fear, but from something deeper, something that felt like recognition without memory. And then I noticed the corner of the photo, a shadow that did not belong to the scene, a figure partially visible, just enough to make out the shape of a boy standing a few feet behind me. Older, watching, not part of the moment, but present in it, and I leaned closer, my breath uneven as I tried to see his face, but it was too blurred, too distant, just a silhouette, just enough to confirm what I was already beginning to understand. I had not been alone in that memory. I had just never noticed, and suddenly, his words echoed in my mind. Not loud, not demanding, just certain, "You will understand." And for the first time, I realized that this was not about control, not entirely. This was about time, about something that had started long before I knew it existed. And as I lowered the frame slowly, one question settled into my chest, heavier than all the others. Not why me, not anymore, but how long had he been watching me without me ever seeing him? I did not remember falling asleep, but I remembered waking up with the photograph still in my hand, the edges pressing faint lines into my palm like it had been trying to leave a mark, a reminder that it had not been a dream, that none of this was. And for a moment I stayed still, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of a place that never truly rested. Even in silence there was movement here, controlled, distant, like everything operated just out of reach. And then the memory came. Back all at once. The house, the contract, him, and finally the photograph, the boy in the background, the version of me that had never noticed him. And I sat up too quickly, the frame slipping slightly in my grip as reality settled heavier than before, because now it was not just about where I was. It was about how long this had been unfolding without me knowing. I swung my legs off the bed and stood, the floor cool beneath my feet, grounding in a way nothing else had been, and for the first time since arriving, I did not hesitate. I needed answers, not later, not eventually. Now, the door opened without resistance. The hallway outside just as still as the room had been, sunlight filtering through tall windows and long, quiet lines, and as I moved forward, I noticed something I had missed the night before. People, not many, but enough, staff moving through the space with practiced efficiency, each step precise, each glance brief, and every single one of them acknowledged me in the same way, a slight nod, respectful, not curious, not surprised, like I belonged here in a way I had not yet accepted. And that unsettled me more than if they had stared, because it meant my presence was not unexpected. It meant I had been accounted for. I followed the sound of voices, low and distant, until I reached the end of the hall where the space opened into something larger. A room that felt less like a living area and more like a center point, a place where decisions were made without needing to be announced. And he was there, exactly where I knew he would be without knowing how I knew, standing near a long table, speaking quietly to someone who immediately stepped back the moment I appeared, leaving us alone without being told. Like even his silence gave instructions, Adrian did not turn right away. And for a second I wondered if he already knew I was there, if he had always known. But then he did, slowly, his gaze finding mine with that same unreadable calm that made it impossible to tell what he was thinking. "You went through my things," he said, not accusing, not questioning, just stating it as fact, and something about that made my grip tighten around the photograph I had not realized I was still holding. "It was in my room," I replied, my voice sharper than before, steadier, because now I had something to push against, something real. I stepped closer, holding the frame up just enough for him to see. "Why do you have this?" I asked, and this time, there was a pause, small, almost invisible, but it was there, the first crack in the perfect control he carried. His eyes moved to the photo, not surprised, not defensive, just aware, like he had been expecting this moment, like it had been waiting just as much as I had. "Because it belongs to me," he said, and that answer should have made no sense, but it did, in a way that felt unsettlingly complete, because nothing in this house existed without intention, and if he had kept this, if he had placed it where I could find it, then this was not an accident. This was a step, and suddenly, I understood something I had been avoiding since the moment I signed that contract. This was not about him taking something from me. This was about him revealing something I had never known was already his. And as I lowered the photograph slowly, one question remained, heavier than before, no longer uncertain, no longer afraid, just focused. "How long?" I asked quietly, and this time, he did not look away. He did not answer immediately. And that was the first real answer he gave me, not in words, but in silence, the kind that carried weight, the kind that meant the truth was not simple. His eyes stayed on mine, steady, unflinching, and for a moment I wondered if he was deciding how much I was allowed to know, not whether I deserved it, but how much of it would change everything. And then he moved, not toward me, not away, just enough to shift the distance between us into something intentional. Long enough, he said finally, his voice calm, controlled, but there was something underneath it now, something that had not been there before, not weakness, not regret, something closer to inevitability, and I felt it, that shift, like the ground beneath this entire situation had just tilted again. That is not an answer, I replied, my grip tightening around the frame, because I needed something solid, something I could hold on to that made sense, but nothing about him worked that way. Adrian did not deal in simple explanations, he dealt in outcomes, in decisions that had already been made long before anyone else realized they were part of them. It is the only one that matters, he said, and that should have frustrated me more than it did. But instead, it made something else settle in my chest, something quieter, something more dangerous, because part of me believed him, part of me understood that whatever this was, it had not started yesterday. It had not started with my father's debt or that contract. It had been moving long before that. Like a current I had been caught in without ever seeing the water. I took a step closer, closing the space between us before I could second-guess it. You were there, I said, holding up the photograph again, my voice lower now, not uncertain, not accusing, just certain. In that picture, you were there. And for the first time, he did not deflect, did not redirect. His gaze dropped briefly to the frame and then back to me. And something in his expression shifted, not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for me, because I was looking for it now. Yes, he said, and the word landed heavier than anything else he had said so far. Simple, direct, undeniable. My breath caught, not because I did not expect it, but because hearing it made everything real in a way I could not ignore anymore. Why? I asked, and this time the question was not about the marriage, not about the contract. It was about that moment, that memory, that version of me who had been completely unaware that someone like him had already stepped into her world without being invited. And he watched me for a long second before answering, like he was measuring something again, not my reaction, but my understanding. Because you were not supposed to be alone, he said, and that answer should not have made sense, but it did, in a way that made my chest tighten, because it was not possessive, it was not controlling, it was something else, something that did not fit the version of him I had built in my head. You did not even know me, I said, but even as I said it, I was not sure it was true, because what if knowing did not start with introductions? What if it started with watching, with noticing, with choosing without being seen? And that thought unsettled me more than anything else, because it meant this was not random. It meant I had been chosen, not for what I had become, but for something I had been long before I understood the world I was standing in now. And as the silence settled between us again, it felt different this time. Not empty, not uncertain, but full of something unspoken, something that had been building long before I ever asked the question. And for the first time since this began, I realized something that changed everything. I was not trying to escape him anymore. I was trying to understand why I never saw him coming. The way he said it stayed with me longer than it should have. Not the words themselves, but the certainty behind them, like he had never questioned his place in my life even when I did not know he existed. And that was the part that unsettled me the most. Not the control, not the power, but the quiet patience of it. Because patience meant time, and time meant intention. And I was starting to understand that nothing about this was accidental. Not the photograph, not the room, not even the way everyone in this house looked at me like I had always belonged here. And I hated that part of me was beginning to believe it. I turned away from him first, not because I was done, but because I needed space to think, to breathe, to separate what I felt from what I was being pulled into. The room suddenly felt smaller, not physically, but mentally, like every answer only led to more questions that were already waiting for me. And I walked toward the window, needing something real, something outside of him. The glass cool under my fingertips as I looked out over the city stretching endlessly beyond the estate. Buildings stacked against the horizon, cars moving in distant lines, a world that continued without knowing I had just stepped out of it completely. You could have told me, I said after a moment, my voice quieter now, not confrontational, just honest, because that was what this had become, not a fight, but a search. At any point, you could have told me. And I heard the shift behind me before I saw it. The subtle change in the air that always happened when he moved, controlled, deliberate, and then his voice, closer than before, but still keeping that careful distance. And what would that have changed? He asked, and I closed my eyes for a second because I did not have an answer. Not one that felt strong enough to stand against the reality of everything that had already happened, because he was right. If he had told me years ago, I would not have believed him. I would have walked away. I would have forgotten. And somehow, he had known that. Somehow, he had chosen to wait instead, not forcing, not revealing, just watching. And that realization settled into something heavier than anger, something that felt dangerously close to understanding. I turned back to face him slowly, my arms crossing instinctively, not as a barrier, but as something to hold on to. So you waited, I said. And this time it was not a question, it was a statement, because I could see it now, in the way he stood, in the way he carried himself, like this moment had always been inevitable. Yes, he replied simply, and there was no pride in it, no satisfaction, just truth, and that made it harder to resist, because it did not feel like manipulation. It felt like something that had existed long before either of us had control over it. For what? I asked, and this time, the answer came without pause, without hesitation, like it had always been ready. For you to be safe, he said, and the word landed differently now, not as a deflection, not as a vague promise, but as something specific, something tied to everything I still did not know, and I felt it again. That shift, that realization that there were parts of this story he had not told me yet, not because he did not want to, but because I was not ready to understand them. And for the first time, that did not frustrate me. It made me cautious, because if he had been watching, if he had been waiting, then there was a reason. And reasons like that did not come from nowhere. They came from something bigger, something hidden, something that had shaped both of us in ways I was only starting to see. And as the silence settled between us again, it did not feel empty anymore. It felt like the edge of something, like standing at the beginning of a truth that was finally starting to surface. And I realized something then that I could not ignore. I was not just inside his world now. I was inside a story that had been written long before I ever learned how to read it. It should have felt like relief to finally understand something, even a small part of it. But instead it felt like standing in the middle of a puzzle where every piece I picked up only showed me how much I was still missing. And the worst part was not the confusion. It was the growing sense that he was not lying, that everything he said, every measured word, carried a truth I had not caught up to yet. And that made it harder to fight him, harder to push back against something that did not feel like a trap anymore, but something closer to protection. Even if I did not fully understand what I was being protected from, I let out a slow breath and stepped away from the window, the distance between us shifting again, not as sharp as before, not as defensive, but still careful, because I could not afford to let my guard down completely. Not yet. Safe from what? I asked. And this time the question did not come out as a challenge. It came out quieter, more focused, because now I knew the answer mattered. Now I knew it was not just a word he used to control the situation. It was something real, something that had shaped everything leading up to this moment. And for the first time since I had met him, Adrian did not answer right away, not because he was avoiding it, but because he was choosing how to say it. And that alone told me this was different. This was not a conversation he took lightly. His gaze shifted slightly, not away from me, but past me, like he was looking at something I could not see, something tied to a past I had only just started to uncover. From people who would not have waited, he said finally, and the words settled into the room with a weight that felt heavier than anything else he had said so far. Not dramatic, not exaggerated, just real, and I felt my chest tighten, not from fear, but from the realization that this was bigger than I had allowed myself to consider. This was not just about him wanting me here. This was about others who might have wanted something very different, something without patience, without restraint. And suddenly, his waiting did not feel like control anymore. It felt like a choice, a deliberate decision to hold back when he did not have to. And that changed something, even if I did not want it to. And you think bringing me here fixes that? I asked, my voice steady. But there was a new layer to it now, something more analytical, because I was starting to see the structure behind his actions, the reasoning that had been hidden beneath everything I had first assumed. It does not fix it, he replied, his tone calm, grounded. It removes you from it. And there it was, not a solution, not a resolution, just a shift, a repositioning, like moving a piece on a board to keep it from being taken, and I hated how much that made sense, how much it aligned with everything else I had seen, the control, the precision, the way nothing here existed without purpose. I looked down at the photograph still in my hand, the younger version of me frozen in a moment I had never questioned before. And for the first time, I wondered what I had missed back then, what signs had been there that I had not understood, what presence had existed just outside my awareness. And then I looked back at him, really looked this time, not just at the man standing in front of me, but at the space around him, the way everything seemed to bend slightly in his direction, the quiet authority that did not need to announce itself. And I realized something that shifted the ground beneath my thoughts once again. He had not just been watching me. He had been positioning himself between me and something else, something I still could not see clearly, and whether I liked it or not, that meant one thing. I had not just been chosen, I had been protected. And as that realization settled in, it brought a new question with it, one that felt sharper than the rest, one that I was not sure I was ready to hear the answer to. If he had been protecting me all this time, then what exactly had he been protecting me from? And why did it feel like I was only now stepping into the part of the story where that answer would finally matter? The question stayed between us, unspoken but loud, filling the space in a way silence never had before, and I could feel it in the way he held himself, the slight shift in his shoulders, the way his gaze did not leave mine even when the weight of everything I had just realized settled deeper into my chest. Because this was the moment where things stopped being abstract, where protection stopped being a vague idea and became something real, something with a shape I had not yet seen but could already feel pressing in around me. And I did not step back this time. I did not look away, because I needed to know, not later, not gradually, but now. Even if the answer changed everything again, then tell me, I said quietly, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. Because fear had shifted into something else entirely, something sharper, something that demanded clarity instead of avoiding it. And for a moment, just a moment, Adrian did not look like the man who controlled every room he walked into. He looked like someone calculating the cost of truth, not for himself, but for me. And that was the difference. That was what made this harder to understand. Because if this had only been about power, the answer would have come easily. But this was something else. Something that required precision even now. Your father's debt was not random, he said finally, each word placed carefully, like stepping stones across something fragile. And I felt my breath catch, not because I had not considered it, but because hearing it confirmed something I had been trying not to see. What does that mean? I asked, my grip tightening slightly, the photograph still in my hand like a connection to everything I had not understood until now, and his eyes softened, not visibly. Not in a way anyone else would notice, but enough for me to feel it, enough to know this was not easy for him either. It means, he continued, that the people I mentioned they knew about you long before I brought you here, and the words landed heavier than anything else, not loud, not dramatic, just precise, and I felt something shift inside me, something that had been building since the moment I saw that photograph, finally taking shape into something real, something I could not ignore anymore. I shook my head slightly. Not in denial, but in disbelief, because the idea that my life had been observed, influenced, positioned without my knowledge felt too large to fully grasp all at once. Why? I asked again, but this time the question carried something different, not confusion, not fear, but urgency, because now it mattered in a way it had not before, and Adrian took a step closer, not enough to invade my space. Just enough to close the distance between us into something intentional, something that made his presence feel more real, more grounded. Because of who you are, he said, and the answer should have been simple, but it was not. Not when everything about me felt ordinary, not when nothing in my past had ever suggested something like this. And yet, the certainty in his voice did not waver, not even slightly, like he had never questioned it. Like he had always known something about me that I had not yet discovered, and I felt it again. That pull between disbelief and understanding, that tension between the life I thought I had lived and the one that had been unfolding behind it. And suddenly, everything felt connected. The photograph, the waiting, the timing of it all. None of it was random. None of it was accidental. It was a pattern, one I was only now beginning to see. And as I looked at him, really looked at him, I realized something that changed the way I saw this entire situation. He had not just brought me here to keep me close. He had brought me here because this was the only place he could keep me safe. And that meant one thing. Whatever was outside these walls, whatever had been moving toward me all this time, it had not stopped. It had just been delayed. And now that I was here, now that I knew, the real story was finally beginning. The air felt different after that, heavier but clearer, like something invisible had finally taken shape around me. No longer just a feeling or a suspicion, but a truth I could not step away from. And for the first time since all of this began, I was not standing in confusion. I was standing in the middle of something real, something that had been moving toward me for years without me ever noticing. And that realization did not make me step back. It made me step forward, just one step. But it changed everything, because now I was choosing to stay in this moment instead of being pulled through it. Then stop speaking in pieces, I said quietly, my voice steady in a way it had not been before. If this started before me, then I deserve to know all of it. And this time, Adrian did not hesitate, did not pause, did not measure the distance between truth and silence. He just looked at me, directly, fully, like this was the moment he had been waiting for. Not the contract, not the marriage, but this, the moment I stopped resisting and started asking the right questions. You were never supposed to be part of this world, he said, his voice calm, but carrying something deeper now, something grounded in memory rather than control. Your family kept you away from it. And something in my chest tightened at that, not from fear, but from recognition, because there were always things my father would not explain, places we moved away from without warning, conversations that stopped when I entered the room, pieces of a life that never fully connected until now. But someone else noticed, he continued, and I felt it again, that shift. That sense of something larger moving beneath the surface, something I had only just begun to see. Someone who does not believe in waiting. And there it was again, that contrast, the difference between him and whoever else had been watching, the difference between patience and something far more immediate. And suddenly, his choices made sense in a way they had not before. The waiting, the distance, the control. It had not been about possession. It had been about timing, about making sure that when this moment came, I would be somewhere he could reach me first. So you stepped in, I said, my voice quieter now, not because I was unsure, but because I was starting to understand the weight of it. And he nodded once, a small movement, but definitive. I did what was necessary, he replied. And for the first time, those words did not sound cold. They sounded deliberate, like every step had been chosen with purpose. Not just for him, but for me. And I felt something shift inside me then. Something I had been holding on to since the beginning. The idea that I was only here because I had been forced, because I had no choice. But that was not entirely true anymore. Not when I could see the pattern, not when I could feel the intention behind everything that had happened. You could have taken me earlier, I said, testing the thought, testing him, and his answer came immediately, without hesitation. And you would have hated me for it, he said. And I knew he was right. I would have run. I would have fought. I would have never understood. And somehow, he had known that too, which meant this had never been about control, not in the way I thought. It had been about timing, about waiting until I could see what he saw, until I could stand here and ask instead of resist. And as the silence settled between us again, it felt different now, not empty, not tense, but balanced, like something had shifted into place between us. And I realized something then that I could not ignore. I was not just here because he brought me here. I was here because he had been the only one who chose to wait, the only one who gave me time I did not even know I needed. And as I looked at him, standing there not as a stranger anymore, but as someone who had been part of my story long before I understood it, one thought settled into my mind with quiet certainty. Maybe I had not been forced into this life. Maybe I had been guided into it. And the difference between those two things changed everything.